What's up, y'all? It's GC Kinsey, here to talk about my gender-affirming hysterectomy, Part 4. I had a hysterectomy, which was my first gender-affirming surgery in December of 2023. And now, at a year and a half post-op, I'm making a series of videos answering your questions about what that whole experience was like. This video is the fourth and final part of the series. Part 1 was about why I wanted this surgery. Part 2 was about finding a surgeon and doing all the pre-op preparations. Part 3 was about the surgery itself. And this video, Part 4, is about recovery and life on the other side. If you haven't seen the other parts, they're all linked in the description so you can check them out. But for now, let's get into Part 4, which is all about healing from the surgery and how much it's improved my life. And I want to start with a warning that I will be discussing some things that some of y'all might find squick-worthy, including reproductive organs, bodily fluids, and pain. If any of that means this video isn't for you, then that's totally cool, and I have a whole bunch of other ones you can watch instead. I also want to give a disclaimer that even though I'm going to be talking about medical stuff, I am not a doctor or any kind of medical professional. I'm just sharing my personal experience as a patient. With all of that out of the way, let's get into your questions. First, I want to talk about the immediate recovery period with these two questions. From Rasa1155 on YouTube, congrats on the surgery. What kind of limitations are on your movement during recovery? How is walking, bending over, lifting things? Do you know how long the recovery period is? I'm sure it varies between people. I'd love to hear your experience. Thanks. And from Bishop Deacon Cardinal on Instagram, what's the recovery time like, or was like for you? I'm having one in June. Congratulations, that's awesome. And I'm terrified about the recovery time. So the recovery time is going to be different from patient to patient, but in general, the good news is that recovering from a laparoscopic hysterectomy is not that bad. I was surprised by how much less painful it was than I expected and how quick the recovery timeline was. Here's a snapshot of how things went. As you can see, I was only on painkillers for the first week, narcotics for the first 3 days, and then Tylenol only for the rest of that week. After that, I wasn't in enough pain to need anything. I did have some gnarly bruising all over my abdomen, but I couldn't really feel it that much. What honestly hurt the most during that first week was all the gas from the air they pump into you during surgery. I could feel it all the way up to my shoulder sometimes, which they did warn me about, so it wasn't a surprise, but still not fun. I just walked around a lot to help get it out. Once it was gone, I could barely even tell I'd had surgery. The only times I really felt sore were when I coughed, sneezed, or laughed too hard during those first 2 or 3 weeks post-op, and when I had to stand up or sit down. I used my arms instead of my core muscles to get in and out of chairs, and I slept in my recliner at first because that was easier than getting in and out of the bed. I also had to take it slow getting in and out of my car once I started driving again. And by the way, if you've just had abdominal surgery, even laparoscopically, put a pillow under your seatbelt because trust me, you don't want to hit the brakes without something cushioning you. Walking was fine, bending over was fine, lifting things was fine, but I did have a weight restriction of not being able to lift more than 10 pounds for the first couple of weeks post-op. Those restrictions will also be different for everyone, but mine were thankfully pretty minimal. It didn't take me long at all to get back to my usual activities. Not just the necessities like driving or shopping or cooking for myself again, but also fun things like recording music and filming videos. The hardest part was waiting until I could get back in the pool again and start working out. They told me to wait at least 6 weeks post-op so there was no risk of infection from being submerged in water, but I felt like swimming a whole lot sooner than that. There are all kinds of different factors that contribute to how smoothly a recovery goes. Some of the things that helped with mine were having a laparoscopic surgery, not having any surgical complications, having pretty good strength and stamina before I went in, having a full 3 weeks off work because my surgery was right before the winter holidays when we're shut down anyway, having a job that's fully remote and not physically demanding, so going back to work wasn't that bad, and being able to get plenty of rest while I was off and not having any big responsibilities. Thinking about those kinds of factors might give you some idea of what your recovery will be like, but of course it's important to address any specific concerns you have with your surgeon. On the plus side, hysterectomy is a routine procedure that a lot of people have, and a good surgeon will do everything they can to help make your recovery as smooth as possible. Alright, next I want to answer some questions about how it feels physically when an organ is no longer inside your body. From Crusading Comrade 8873 on YouTube, this isn't a serious question, but I'm curious. Does it ever feel like there's more space / feel like something's missing in that area? Like empty in the sense that it's not full, not in a mental health way. No, not at all. I can't tell any difference in how full or empty my abdomen feels without a uterus inside it. At my pre-op ultrasound, the tech did say my uterus was very small. I believe her exact words were, "You could pull that thing out with tweezers," so maybe that's why. From Paula Limberg on YouTube. Did you experience any unwanted complications in terms of reciprocity with neighboring organs? Fortunately, I didn't experience any complications of any kind, so no problems with the neighboring organs at all, but there was one small, not complication, but change, let's say, with one neighboring organ which these two questions asked about specifically. From AO24764 on YouTube, "Hi GC, I would like to get one myself one day, and my main concern is organ settling / issues with digestion and urination. Have you had any issues with this?" And from Ilia's Odyssey 9626 on YouTube, "I would also like to know if you had any issues with peeing afterwards." Yeah, so let's talk about peeing. During my initial consult and Q&A, the surgeon warned me that sometimes when you take out a uterus, your bladder can reposition itself a little, and that can make things different when you pee. I didn't notice any changes with peeing itself. It still felt the same. I could still empty my bladder just fine. But what did change was the signals for when I needed to pee. As in, I could no longer tell my bladder was filling up while I was sitting down. So I wouldn't think I needed to pee until I stood up, and then I'd suddenly be like, "Oh shit, I've got to pee right now." That was temporary though. My brain eventually got used to whatever new position my bladder had ended up in. So now my pee signals are back to normal whether I'm standing or sitting. No issues with digestion either, just the massive improvement of not throwing up all the time anymore thanks to the other scar tissue removal operation I had during that same surgery. Next question, from Reg Aroni on Instagram. "I know you're ace and may not apply. How does the cervix close? And is there any effect on penetration / atrophy? Also, I wanted to say you are my icon. I see so much of you in my identity. Thank you for existing." Oh my god, thank you for existing. And as far as these questions go, they're not directly relevant in my case, but I'll still give them my best shot. How does the cervix close? Well, I had my cervix removed, so it was no longer there to close, but what my surgeon did was close up that end of the vagina where my cervix used to be. So what's left is the opening at one end and what's called a cuff at the other, a bat cave that doesn't go anywhere essentially. If you keep your cervix, I'm not exactly sure how that closes where it used to connect to your uterus, so that's something to talk about with your surgeon. And is there any effect on penetration / atrophy? For those of you who don't know, vaginal atrophy is something that can happen on testosterone or after a hysterectomy or after menopause, and that goes for anyone with a vagina regardless of gender. Basically, the vaginal walls get thinner and weaker. They might not self-lubricate or stretch as much. They might be more prone to tearing or bleeding, and that can make penetration painful. The solution is typically a local estrogen applied inside the vagina, so you get the effects there, but not everywhere else. As of the time I'm filming and posting this, I am right at 3 years on T and 1.5 years post-op from my histo, and I haven't had any signs of atrophy at all. But I do think it's important to look out for those signs so that you can do something about it if it happens. Next question, from Les5503 on YouTube. Since you've been on a slower, more gradual titration of T, was that enough to make up for the lack of endogenous hormones? Alright, so this one requires a little bit of context. The whole time I've been on T, I've been on what's considered a lower than average dose, which typically results in slower changes. I did that on purpose because I'm a singer and wanted to try to help the vocal changes happen as gradually as possible. But even on a lower dose, it didn't take long for testosterone to become my body's dominant hormone, which is something you can see in your blood work when you get your T levels checked. By the time I had my hysterectomy, my T levels had been in the same average range as cis males for a while. That was more than enough to make up for the lack of endogenous hormones, but in my case, it also didn't matter. There was no lack because I only got rid of one of my ovaries. If you have both ovaries removed, your body can't make a dominant sex hormone anymore, so unless you take hormones, that pretty much means instant menopause. So I kept that one ovary just in case I ever lose access to T, that way I can still make a dominant sex hormone without having to go through the dysphoria of actually taking E. Next question, from EdSpace on YouTube. So I was wondering, is there any kind of thing people should do before bottom surgery to mentally prepare for how things are after surgery? Yeah, there are a few things I would recommend. One is to be very certain you want that surgery and have a clear understanding of why. The regret rate for gender-affirming surgeries is incredibly low, but it is still a big decision and it's permanent. So being certain about why you want it can help ensure that you won't regret it. That's some work you can do with the help of a therapist, with advice from others in the trans community, especially others who've had that same surgery, but ultimately your reasons for wanting that surgery have to come from you. I found it helpful to dump all my thoughts and feelings into a Word document where I could rearrange them and organize them and consider how I was framing them, because that helped me reach the point where I could firmly articulate, here's exactly how I think this surgery would be beneficial. 2 is to prepare your mind for post-op pain and healing. And I think that's even more important if this is going to be your first surgery ever. This was not my first surgery. I'd had several others in the past. Like I mentioned in part 2 of this series, one of them was an emergency surgery to deal with a ruptured organ. So not only did I know what surgical pain was like going in, but I also figured that a planned surgery like this one could never be as bad as that emergency surgery. But I still knew it was going to hurt and that I was going to have to get through that. Oddly enough, I leaned on advice from the BDSM community, specifically the S&M portion, because that involves giving someone consent to hurt you for reasons that you personally find beneficial, which is a surprisingly similar dynamic to gender-affirming surgery, right? You're giving your surgeon consent to literally cut you open, but you know it's going to benefit your life in a major way. To that end, I also thought about aftercare. How am I going to manage my pain aside from just taking painkillers? How can I modify movements that typically require the use of my core and lower body so I don't hurt myself any further? How am I going to prepare meals? How can I be most comfortable when I sleep? How can I conserve energy and get enough rest to help me heal? Figuring out all that involves some physical preparation of my living space alongside the mental preparation for the pain. And 3 is to trust the process, which is one of the hardest things for me because I'm the kind of person who likes to plan, who likes to control as many variables as possible to avoid unpleasant surprises, and there is a lot you can do to increase your chances of things going well, starting with finding a surgeon you trust. But even so, something unexpected can always happen, so you've got to be prepared to trust the process too. Maybe you have backup plans for scenarios like your driver having to cancel last minute, or your body having a post-op complication. But there are some things you just can't predict, and it helps to have a mindset of rolling with the punches. It also helps to know that it's okay to feel nervous about your surgery. That's normal. It doesn't mean you should start panicking or doubting yourself, which you know if you're sure that you want this surgery and you're sure why. So when those pre-op jitters inevitably hit, reminding yourself to trust the process can help you calm down and feel better. Alright, final question from Darth Claire Cosplay on Instagram. What's something you didn't expect? I've already talked about how the relatively low pain and quick recovery timeline was a pleasant surprise, but I saved this question for last because I want to end this whole retrospective by talking about what surprised me the most. The massive boost in gender euphoria I got from this surgery. I had expected to feel somewhat positive, mostly neutral about it. My periods had already been gone for over 3 years, so I figured I'll finally be able to stop taking the pill, I'll get rid of the little bit of mild dysphoria that still gives me, and other than that, my life probably won't change that much. But I was so wrong in the best way. First of all, the surgery got rid of more than just that little bit of dysphoria around taking the pill. It also got rid of my long-held extreme fear of pregnancy, which I later realized was heavily tied up in dysphoria as well. Not having to carry that fear around anymore was a huge weight off of my shoulders. But as awesome as it was to get rid of that fear and dysphoria, it was the euphoria that really blew me away. I've talked before about how running on T has had massive mental health benefits, keeping my mood more stable, making it easier to handle stress, but running on T and stopping estrogen-based birth control, holy fucking shit, y'all. It was like a literal fog lifted. Everything was so much brighter and clearer. It actually reminded me of when I had LASIK and I could just see, except instead of my vision, this was my whole mental and emotional energy. And the further I got into recovery, the more I could tell my physical energy was improving without the pill as well. I think that's why I was itching to get back to the gym way before my body had fully healed. For years, I've heard so many complaints that hormonal birth control saps your energy and makes you feel terrible, even from people who are supposed to be running on estrogen. But even so, I'd always thought I was one of the lucky ones. Like, good thing the pill never did that to me. It wasn't until I came off it that it sort of hit me like, I've been on this stuff since I was 13, you know? In my entire adult life, I'd never known how normal energy was supposed to feel. I never realized I'd been deprived of that. Even after I got on T and saw how much that improved things, I still had no idea how much better it could get without the pill in the mix. With that fog lifting and my energy improving so dramatically, my gender euphoria reached levels that I had never previously known were possible. I was just constantly feeling these waves of it. It was so powerful I couldn't believe it. I think that big euphoria surge was the catalyst for the nature of my dysphoria changing from pain to something more like confusion or cognitive dissonance, which has been so much easier to handle. And the baseline for how I feel in my body has sat at a much more euphoric place since I had that surgery. I'd wanted it for so many years, for so many reasons, that I knew it was going to be good for me, but what was something I didn't expect? For my hysterectomy to be this life-changing. And on that note, now is where I want to wrap up this whole retrospective and turn the conversation over to you. Thank you so much to everyone for sending in such great questions. If you have any more, if you have any hysterectomy or other gender-affirming surgery experience of your own to share, if you already have stuff to ask me about top surgery for when I eventually make that retrospective as well, then drop a comment below and let's get a discussion going. You can also reach out to me on other social media. I'm GC Kinsey across all platforms. And while you're here, feel free to check out some of my other videos. I've got more vlogs like this one about my experiences as a queer person, along with cosplay music videos, cosplay tutorials, a whole bunch of cool resources for singers about voice changes on testosterone, and more right here on this channel. So make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss anything new. And with that, thank you so much for watching this video and the whole series. I really appreciate all of your support. Happy Pride Month, and I will see you on the next one.